So our Grom Chopper project got accepted into the Handbuilt Bike Show in Austin, Texas this year, 2022. And so the day before the show, we took the bike down there, dropped it off, and got this cool VIP pass. And it was interesting seeing behind the scenes of sorts before the show as they were setting it up, with all the bikes and equipment just strewn about the place. It turned out this is the time in which they take the bikes and do photographs of each individual bike. And you can see this on their website. They have pictures of every bike that was in the show. And I'll put a link in the description to their website. And this is Revival Cycles that I'm talking about. It's their website. And then that evening there was a special pre-show party thing that they had for the builders. And we went to check that out. And they had some of the really nice bikes, not mine, some of the nice ones, on display at the party. And then come the next day, all the bikes are set up and we can go and peruse these things and see all the wonderful machines. And here's the little Grom Reaper all set up with some other small engine compatriots. And there was a plethora of bike variations here, from racers of old school and new school to bobbers and choppers. There's this Harley chopper with this stained glass type paint job on it. Then there was this BMW Airhead with a Springer front end and Jeep tires on it. And then I stumbled upon this guy. And this bike was made by a guy named Dana Wolf Hood out of Colorado. I thought it was phenomenal. It was definitely one of my favorite bikes at the show. Mainly because I'm a bit of a suspension geek. And this had the most thoughtful, mind-blowing suspension I have ever seen on a bike, where he had the shock for the front suspension behind the driver's seat. Meaning the lever for the whole front suspension ran halfway through the bike. It was very innovative and creative. And I found with a lot of these bikes that if you talk to the builder, you really could appreciate the bike because there were so many little things in there that would be hidden at first glance if you didn't know to look for them. And so here's a bike that was actually given away by Revival Cycles to be built for this show. And he blacksmithed this really cool stainless steel skull character on the back with a motorcycle tire in its mouth. And then BMW was one of the sponsors for this event, and so they were heavily promoting their new R18 series of bikes that has that classic looking motor in it. And what I found interesting was that on the display of one of these bikes, you could see they had an ignition coil for each cylinder like you would in a modern car. And then there was this bike, which you might recognize this. This is from a company formerly known as Confederate Motorcycles, which is now Combat Motorcycles. And then there was this cool looking chopper that was just very intricate. Then there was this beautifully restored GL 1000 done by a guy named Ari Sanchez. And traveling around the room, we stumbled again upon our Grom Reaper and its fellow small bore motorcycles. One of which was this nicely named War Monkey, which actually had a Lifan motor in it that these guys had modified from 150 cc's to 250 cc's. And talking to them, it was interesting because they said at 250 cc's, they had gotten that thing up to 102 miles per hour. And amazingly, people were actually looking at the Grom, and it looked like they were enjoying it. Some of them even were taking pictures of it, and then one of the guys that was looking at it turned out to be the owner of this motorcycle, which I forget at this point if it's a vintage Honda or a vintage Yamaha, like from the 60s. And he had rebuilt all this stuff. He was a mechanic out of California, and he actually races this motorcycle. It's a 250cc class motorcycle. And he made the tank and seat out of aluminum, and he had done some aluminum work on modifying the clutch on this as well. That was very interesting, but I never would have known if he hadn't told me. And there was a couple raked out choppers there as well. Some nice 70s style choppers in the house. And there was this showstopper motorcycle in the house as well. This is the bike that won the Born Free Motorcycle Show this year. It was very well designed. This guy's a mechanical engineer, and he had done some really trick mechanical stuff to this bike where it had a turbocharger on it. It also had a full stainless steel frame, and he had one pedal that was the brake, the clutch, and the Kickstarter for this bike. And he had also made his own 4-valve per cylinder heads for this engine. And then there was this bike by Revival Cycles. This is one they made, I believe, for the previous Handbuilt Bike Show, which is like in 2019, I believe. And this one is called the Birdcage, they call this. And it's based on a BMW Airhead engine and a very cool trellis style frame thing going on here. There was a Honda Super Hawk. It's like a 90s V-twin Honda Superbike, and this one I believe has a VFR swing arm on it. I don't think the Hawks originally came with that. And it also has a modern front end on it as well.
Luckily, no one's asked me.
And then here's one that I completely missed until I was looking at the footage for this, where you can see the name badge on it is Kawabusa. I did notice that there was a turbocharger on it, but I completely failed to notice what type of engine was in this bike. And then there was this cool green chopper by a guy named Tim Skates. And then there was this bike out front, and this was a modern Indian-based bike where the frame and the engine were clearly from a modern Indian, but then the front end at least looked like it was from a vintage Indian, but it also had a modern disc brake on it. So pretty cool bike, this one, I thought. There was also this adult Schwinn motorcycle, very well done. Then saving the best for last here, there was a bike tucked away deep into the corner of this show under a very dim lamp that was, I thought, possibly the coolest thing in the whole building, and it was a completely unrestored well bike. And a well bike, I had to look this up, was originally manufactured in England for World War II soldiers, and they would drop these things in a tube out of a plane, and the soldiers would open the tube, pull this bike out, unfold it, and then it had no kickstart. You had to push start this thing, and then off they would go. It was a very tiny bike and really interesting to look at. And then after the show, I got to go by the Revival Cycles shop where they make their bikes, and that was a pretty cool setup they got there. They had a nice little jig setup for frame building. They had a homemade cabinet for doing powder coating. They had a bunch of metal forming tools, of course, like plenishing wheels, that sort of thing. All in all, this was a great experience going to the show. Really good vibes to the show. Everyone was super nice. Learning about how other people built their bikes, that was one of the best parts of going to the show. I hope you appreciate this little video montage. There were a ton of bikes at this show. I definitely didn't hit all of them, and this was just a bit of the highlights from that show, ones that particularly interested me.